Julian Archer stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office, surveying the New York skyline. At 52, his salt and pepper hair and athletic build gave him the appearance of a man who commanded respect rather than asked for it. The golden rays of sunset glinted off the plaque on his desk. Archer Insurance Group, founder and CEO. 20 years of calculated risks and strategic decisions had transformed his one-man operation into a powerhouse employing over 300 people. Julian's fingers traced the edge of his mahogany desk, custom-made from the very tree he had cut down to build his first office. "Mr. Archer." Molly Rivers' efficient voice came through the intercom. "Your 4 o'clock is here. Send them in, Molly." The door opened to reveal a young couple, their faces bearing the shell-shocked expression Julian had seen countless times. People whose lives had been upended by disaster and now sought help from their insurance company. "Please, sit down." Julian gestured to the leather chairs across from his desk. "Tell me what brought you here today." As they shared their story, a house fire, an initial claim denial, bureaucratic nightmares, Julian listened intently, occasionally making notes in his leather-bound notebook. This was why he had built his company, to fix what was broken in the insurance industry. "Let me be clear," his voice boomed with authority. "Archer Insurance Group will make this right. My assistant will personally oversee your case." The relief on their faces reminded him why he had chosen this path. After they left, Molly entered with a stack of documents requiring his signature. "You still handle these cases personally," she observed as she organized the papers with practiced efficiency. Most CEOs would delegate, but Julian signed the last document with his Mont Blanc pen. A gift from his twins on his 50th birthday. "That's why we're not like most insurance companies, Molly." Speaking of personal touches, Molly pulled out her tablet. Diego Vaughn sent over the final numbers for last quarter. The expansion into commercial real estate insurance exceeded projections by 30%. Julian nodded in acknowledgement of his business partner's contribution. Diego had joined the firm 15 years ago, bringing with him a Rolodex of connections that had proved invaluable. A man with a gift for opening doors that remained firmly closed to others. "And Victoria wants to know if you'll be home for dinner," Molly added, referring to Julian's wife of 25 years. "She's meeting with the party planners for the twins' graduation celebration." "Tell her I'll be there by 7, Julian replied, turning back to the window. His reflection showed a slight smile as he thought of his children. Lucas and Emma were graduating from Harvard Business School next month, both with honors, both eager to join the family business. As the sun set over New York Harbor, Julian reflected on his empire. Archer Insurance Group had become more than just a successful business. It was a legacy. His children would inherit not only a company, but also a reputation for integrity in an industry that often lacked it. "Oh, and Julian." Molly paused at the door, her tone softening with the familiarity of someone who had worked alongside him for 2 decades. "The twins called. They want to discuss some new ideas for the company's digital transformation. They haven't even graduated yet." Julian chuckled with pride. "Always eager, just like their old man." "You've given them everything," Molly remarked thoughtfully, hinting at a future filled with purpose and a clear path forward. Julian's phone buzzed. A text from Victoria about the catering options for the graduation party. He typed a quick response, trusting her judgment as he had with all their social events. Victoria had been handling the company's marketing since before they married, fully aware of the importance of perception in their industry. As he gathered his things to head home, Julian paused to straighten a family photo on his wall, the snapshot from the company's 20th anniversary gala last year. Victoria, elegant as ever, stood between their twins, while Diego, off to the side, raised a glass in celebration. The security guard, Anthony, nodded respectfully as Julian exited the building. "Good evening, Mr. Archer," called Anthony. "Good evening, Anthony. How's your daughter's college fund coming along?" "Growing steady, sir, thanks to that financial advisor you recommended," Anthony replied, as Julian patted him on the shoulder. "Keep at it. Education is the best investment you can make. Driving home in his Mercedes, Julian mentally reviewed his upcoming week. Board meetings, client presentations, and preparations for the twins' graduation party filled his calendar. He had built something substantial, something meaningful, and soon it would be time to start passing the torch to the next generation. Little did he know that the empire he had built with such care was already being undermined from within. The following week began with an unexpected meeting. Derek Hayes, head of security for Archer Insurance Group, requested an urgent appointment first thing Monday morning. Julian had hired Derek 5 years ago, poaching him from a major tech firm, and the man had never once raised an unnecessary alarm. "You're here early, Derek," Julian noted, gesturing for him to sit. Derek's normally composed face now showed signs of concern. "Mr. Archer, something's not right with our systems." Derek began pulling out his tablet. "I've been monitoring some unusual patterns in our digital access logs." Julian leaned forward, his expression sharpening. "Define unusual." "Someone's been copying files after hours," Derek reported, displaying detailed logs on the screen. "I've noticed access to level documents, shareholder agreements, client lists, actuarial data. The access points are internal, using authorized credentials. But the timing doesn't add up." Julian studied the logs, his jaw tightening. "Show me whose credentials." "That's the concerning part, sir," Derek replied, swiping to another screen. "Most of the access comes from Diego Vaughn's login information. But look at the timestamps. Many of these downloads occurred during charity events or board dinners where I personally saw him in attendance. Could his credentials have been compromised?" Julian kept his voice neutral. "Years of business negotiations help mask my growing unease. Possible, but unlikely given our security protocols," he said as Derek shook his head. "Someone with physical access to his office would have an easier time." "The pattern suggests inside knowledge of our systems." Julian stood and walked to his window. The morning sun cast long shadows across the city, shadows not unlike those now falling over his trust in his inner circle. "Increase monitoring quietly. I want to know every file accessed, every change made, no matter how small. But keep this between us for now." "There's more." Derek hesitated. Victoria's marketing database access shows similar patterns. Large data downloads during times when she's been representing the company at events with Diego Vaughn. Julian's expression hardened. "Document everything, Derek, and set up a secure communication channel off the company servers." "Already done, sir," Derek replied, pulling out a burner phone, untraceable and encrypted. "I'll send updates daily." After Derek left, Julian sat at his desk, studying the family photo that now seemed to mock him. He pressed the intercom. "Molly, get me Noah from it. Tell him it's urgent, but he must be discreet." Within minutes, Noah arrived, looking nervous. "You wanted to see me, Mr. Archer." "Sit down, Noah. What I'm about to ask requires absolute confidentiality," Julian said in a tone that brooked no argument. "I need a complete backup of all company data stored off-site. Make it look like routine system maintenance." "Noah, that's a massive undertaking," he stammered, adjusting his glasses. "It would take weeks to do it without raising flags." "You have 3 days," Julian commanded. "Whatever resources you need are yours. But it stays between us." After Noah left, Julian reviewed his calendar. Diego had scheduled several client meetings for the afternoon, meetings that surprisingly weren't in Molly's original schedule. "Molly," Julian called through the intercom, "get me everything you can on Celina Rivera Catering, and find out who's handling their insurance." Molly's eyebrows raised in surprise. "Diego's sister-in-law's company," she wondered aloud. "They're handling the graduation party, aren't they? Just get me the information." Julian kept his voice casual. "And Molly, no need to mention this to anyone else." Throughout the day, Julian maintained his normal routine, yet his mind worked overtime processing the implications. During a budget meeting, He noticed how Diego dominated the discussion about international expansion, something they'd never seriously considered before. The Asian market is right for our services, Diego argued smoothly, his designer suit and impeccably styled hair projecting success. We're talking potential returns of 40% in the first year alone. That's quite optimistic, Julian countered, watching his partner carefully. What about regulatory compliance? Already researched. Victoria chimed in, sharing a quick glance with Diego. A glance that might have seemed innocent just a week ago. Their marketing team had connections with several firms in Singapore. Julian noted how they had prepared their arguments in advance, subtly supporting each other's points. Had he been blind to this dynamic? Or was he now seeing conspiracy where none existed? After the meeting, Julian received a text from Derek. More files copied last night. Claims processing databases. Need to talk. Julian deleted the message and then called his old friend from law school, Victor King. It's Julian Archer. Can we meet somewhere private? The response came quickly. Duck boat tour. Tomorrow at noon. Like old times. That evening, while driving home, Julian took a detour past Selena Rivera Catering. Through the windows, he saw Victoria in animated discussion with Diego's sister-in-law, both laughing over what appeared to be party plans. His phone buzzed. A text from Lucas. Dad, Emma and I have some exciting ideas for modernizing the company structure. Can we meet tomorrow? Julian typed back an affirmative response, his mind already plotting his next moves. He had built this company on calculated risks and careful planning. And if someone was trying to undermine that, they'd soon learn why Julian Archer had succeeded where others had failed. He wasn't just a successful businessman. He was a strategist who had anticipated and overcome countless challenges. This would be no different. The next day, Julian met Victor King on one of New York's famous duck boats, the amphibious vehicles providing both tourism and, in this case, privacy. Victor, now a senior FBI agent specializing in white-collar crime, had aged well since their law school days. His sharp eyes had not lost their analytical edge. You're not going to like what I found, Victor began once they were on the water, away from prying ears. He opened a secure laptop, showing Julian a complex web of financial transactions. It's worse than unauthorized access. They've created an elaborate fraud scheme. Julian studied the screen, his expression darkening. Walk me through it. They've been manipulating claim data, creating ghost policies and siphoning premiums into offshore accounts. Victor explained, pointing to various transactions. The scheme is elegant. I'll give them that. Fake policies written to shell companies, premiums collected and diverted, then massive claims filed and paid out to more shell companies. We're talking millions over several years. How do they hide this from our auditors? Julian's voice remained steady, though his knuckles whitened as he gripped the boat's railing. That's where it gets interesting, Victor continued. He pulled up another screen. The auditing firm was changed 3 years ago. The new firm, owned by a holding company that traces back to a familiar name, Selena Rivera, Diego's sister-in-law, the same woman catering your twins' graduation party. Julian's jaw clenched. The real question is, who else is involved? Show me everything. For the next hour, Victor laid out the evidence. Shell companies in the Cayman Islands, fabricated insurance claims, manipulated actuarial data, all pointing to a sophisticated operation requiring intimate knowledge of Archer Insurance Group's internal systems. Your head of security was right to be concerned, Victor noted, but he only saw the tip of the iceberg. This level of fraud requires multiple people working in concert. What about my children? Julian asked, his voice barely above a whisper. There are some unusual transactions from accounts set up in their names, but given their age and position, they might be unwitting participants, or they might not be, Victor replied. Julian's tone hardened. What's our next move? Legally, we have enough for arrests, Victor replied. But if you want to understand the full scope, We need to let them play out their hand. The graduation party, when is it? Julian inquired. Next Saturday. Perfect timing, Victor confirmed. He pulled out his phone and showed Julian a document. We've been building a case against your main competitor for similar fraud schemes, but looking at these patterns, I'm starting to think we were led in that direction deliberately. Julian's eyes narrowed. A frame job. Seems likely. Your competitor's CEO reached out to us last month, claiming someone was trying to hack their systems. The IP addresses traced back to servers registered to shell companies now connected to this case. As they returned to shore, Julian and Victor finalized their plan. The FBI would continue their official investigation into the competitor, maintaining the illusion that the real perpetrators were safe. One more thing, Victor added as they parted. I'm assigning Agent Allison Ritter to work with your corporate counsel. She specializes in asset recovery. Whatever they've stolen, she'll find it. Back at his office, Julian maintained his usual routine while setting things in motion. He called his lawyer to update his will and the twins' trust fund conditions. He authorized Derek to install additional security measures throughout the building. And he watched how Victoria lingered in Diego's office, how his children exchanged knowing glances during meetings, how his empire seemed to be splitting at the seams. Molly. He called to his assistant later that afternoon. I need you to clear my schedule for tomorrow morning and get me everything we have on our offshore operations. Molly paused at the door. Mr. Archer, whatever's happening, I hope you know you can trust me. Julian looked up at the woman who had stood by him for 20 years, who had never asked for more than she earned, who had helped build this company with unwavering loyalty and dedication. I know, Molly. That's why after next week, we're going to have a long discussion about your future with the company. As darkness fell over New York, Julian remained in his office, reviewing years of records with new eyes. The betrayal cut deep, but he had learned long ago that success required more than just business acumen. It required the strength to make hard decisions. The graduation party would mark more than his children's academic achievement. It would mark the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. The morning of the graduation celebration dawned bright and clear over the Archer family estate. Julian stood in his study, watching as an army of workers transformed his sprawling backyard into a venue worthy of a Society magazine spread, the cost exceeding 6 figures, a fact that now carried bitter irony. The tent construction is running ahead of schedule, Victoria announced as she entered the study without knocking. Her designer dress and impeccably styled hair spoke of hours of preparation. Selena Rivera Catering's team will begin setting up the catering stations by noon, Julian observed, studying his wife's face with renewed interest. 25 years of marriage, and he had never noticed how practiced her smile had become. You seem to have everything under control. Of course I do, Victoria replied with a hint of condescension. I've been managing events like this since before we could afford them. Speaking of which, Diego suggested we invite the Hendersons. Their investment firm could be useful for our expansion plans. Did he now? Julian asked, his tone neutral. Interesting timing. Everything's about timing, darling, Victoria said as she adjusted his tie, a gesture that once felt intimate, but now seemed presumptuous. The children's graduation, our company's growth, everything must be perfect. The emphasis on the word perfect made Julian's jaw tighten imperceptibly. Through the window, he watched Selena Rivera directing her staff with sharp, efficient gestures. The catering company's vans bore a logo that matched one of the shell companies Victor had identified. Have you seen the guest list? Victoria was saying, scrolling through her tablet. Over 200 confirmed attendees. The governor sent his regrets, but his chief of staff will attend. Diego's connections really are invaluable. They certainly are, Julian agreed, thinking of the offshore accounts bearing names similar to those of Diego's various charitable foundations. The doorbell rang, and moments later, Emma bounded into the study. Mom, the florist needs your approval on the centerpieces, and Uncle Diego's here early. He wants to review some documents with you before the party. Emma's eyes darted between them, a calculated look that seemed foreign on her young face. When did my little girl learn to hide business on a Saturday? Julian mused, raising an eyebrow. The parties start in a few hours. Emma giggled lightly. Oh, Daddy, you taught us that the company never sleeps. Besides, Mom and Uncle Diego have been handling all the new agent expansion paperwork. Wouldn't want anything to delay that, right? Emma added. Victoria shot their daughter a sharp look that Julian pretended not to notice. I'll handle the florist first. Tell Diego I'll meet him in the pool house in 15 minutes. Julian, darling, don't forget the photographer arrives at 4. After Emma left, Julian made a call. Derek, is everything in place? Yes, sir. Every room in the house is covered, including the pool house. Agent Bird's team has the perimeter secured. Good. And the other matter? The backup server is operational. If they try to access any files during the party, we'll know. Julian ended the call just as Lucas entered, looking every bit the young executive in his tailored suit. Dad, the caterers need the wine cellar key. I'll handle it personally, Julian replied, carefully watching his son's face. Quite a turnout expected today. You and Emma must be excited. This is a big day for all of us. Lucas smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. Mom says this party will mark the beginning of a new era for Archer Insurance. Did she now? Julian mused as he moved to his safe, deliberately shielding the combination as he opened it. And what era would that be? Lucas shrugged, trying to appear casual. You know, Mom always thinking about marketing angles. Hey, is that the new partnership agreement with the Singapore firm? Julian asked, closing the safe and pocketing the wine cellar key. Let's focus on the party for now. We can discuss business on Monday. Throughout the afternoon, Julian watched the elaborate dance unfold. Victoria fluttered between guests and vendors, every movement choreographed for maximum effect. Diego worked the arriving guests like a seasoned politician, his charm masking the predator beneath. Meanwhile, his twins moved through the crowd with practiced ease, playing their roles to perfection. Everything looks wonderful, Molly commented as she appeared at his side. She had arrived early, ostensibly to help coordinate, but really to serve as another set of eyes. Though I noticed Mrs. Archer spent quite a while in the pool house earlier with Mr. Vaughn, Molly observed. Did you know? Julian sipped his whiskey. And how long was quite a while? 43 minutes. Molly's efficiency was evident in every detail. Victoria's dress was being straightened as Julian chuckled around his glass, though his voice remained steady. Interesting. And where were Lucas and Emma during this time? In the wine cellar, supposedly helping the caterers. But the security feed shows them accessing your home office computer. Keep watching, Julian instructed. The party's just getting started. As afternoon faded into evening, the estate came alive with lights and music. Guests arrived in waves. Business associates, society figures, political connections. Julian played the gracious host while noting every whispered conversation and every significant glance. At the bar, Selena Rivera cornered him. Julian, the party is magnificent. My brother-in-law was right. No one does things quite like the Archers. She gushed. Tell me, how's business? I heard you recently expanded operations. Oh yes, we're growing rapidly. Diego's advice has been invaluable. Such an understanding of international markets. I'm sure he understands many things, Julian replied with a calm smile. Excuse me. I see the governor's chief of staff has arrived. As he moved through the crowd, Julian caught fragments of conversations that meant more than the speakers realized. His children working the room, dropping hints about upcoming changes in company leadership. Victoria and Diego separately, but simultaneously, laying groundwork with key investors. The pieces were all falling into place. Everything must be perfect. He heard Victoria say yet again, this time to the photographer, with an emphasis that felt like a countdown. Julian checked his phone. A message from Victor. Teams in position. Waiting for your signal. The trap is set. All he had to do now was wait for his family to spring it. As the evening settled over the estate, Julian noticed a subtle shift in dynamics. Victoria and Diego had grown bolder with each glass of champagne, their careful choreography beginning to slip. He watched them exchange glances across the crowded terrace, noting an almost imperceptible nod from Victoria before she excused herself from a conversation with a judge. Diego waited 3 minutes before following, his movements seemingly random but unmistakably purposeful. Julian counted to 60 before moving to follow, gesturing slightly to Derek, who immediately activated the house's internal surveillance system. The party's noise faded as Julian entered the house, replaced by the soft sound of footsteps and hushed voices moving toward his home office. He followed silently, the years of suspicion crystallizing into cold certainty with each step through the partially open door. There they were, Victoria pressed against his desk, and Diego's hands possessively on her waist. Their passionate embrace would have been shocking enough, but it was their conversation that revealed the true depth of their betrayal. "Everything's in place," Diego murmured, his accent thicker than usual. "The last transfers went through yesterday. All the accounts are ready." Victoria's laugh, a sound Julian once loved, now dripped with malice. "And the FBI investigation, proceeding exactly as planned. Once they finish investigating our competitor, we'll have total control. The evidence we planted is irrefutable." Julian's eyes darkened. "And you think my children are involved?" Victoria's tone carried a mixture of contempt and amusement. "He's been so busy trying to mentor the kids, he hasn't noticed. They're already on our side." Diego chuckled, his laugh oily and self-satisfied. The great Julian Archer, so focused on building his legacy that he never saw us dismantling it piece by piece. The twins were surprisingly easy to convince. "They're young and ambitious. Victoria," she added, straightening her dress with practiced ease. "All it took was showing them how their father's outdated ethics were holding them back. Lucas especially, he's been dying to prove he's more than just daddy's hair." The Singapore expansion was brilliant. Diego's possessive hand on her waist masked the transfer of assets. "He always did underestimate me," Victoria continued coldly. "After 25 years of playing the supportive wife and handling the little marketing decisions while he built his precious empire, I knew I could see bigger opportunities. And now it's all falling into place. The offshore accounts are set up. The evidence against our competitor is in place, and Julian's own children will support our takeover when the time comes." Julian felt no pain as he listened, only a cold, calculating anger that sharpened his focus. Every word they spoke was being recorded, every admission building the case that would destroy them. "When do we move?" Victoria asked, her fingers tracing patterns on Diego's chest. "Soon," Diego replied. "The FBI investigation into our competitor should conclude within weeks. Once they're implicated, we'll reveal the evidence of your involvement. The board will have no choice but to act, and the children are already prepared to testify about their father's unethical practices if needed." Emma is quite convincing when she talks about overhearing suspicious phone calls, Victoria added with a cruel laugh. Poor Julian, so proud of his integrity. He never understood that real power comes from knowing when to break the rules. "Speaking of rules," Diego pulled her closer, "we should get back to the party before we're missed. Though I must say, celebrating our victory in his own office has a certain appeal." "Patience," Victoria playfully pushed him back. "Soon this will all be ours. No more pretending, no more playing the happy family. Just us running things our way." Julian silently catalogued every word, every admission. He had known about the affair. The surveillance had confirmed it weeks ago. But this level of calculated betrayal involving his own children required a response they wouldn't see coming. He texted Derek, "Save everything. Send copies to Victor." Then he returned to the party, his expression betraying nothing of what he had witnessed. He had one advantage now. They didn't know that he knew. And he intended to use that advantage to its fullest effect. Barely processing the first betrayal, Julian noticed movement in the hallway. Lucas and Emma were approaching the office with champagne glasses in hand. He stepped into an alcove, their voices carrying clearly in the quiet house. "Is everything set?" Emma's excited whisper reached him. "Mom texted that the transfers are complete." Uncle Diego confirmed it. "Dad doesn't suspect a thing," Lucas added, his voice carrying the same ambitious edge Julian had once proudly noted in board meetings. They entered the office where Victoria and Diego were still arranging themselves to look presentable. Julian moved closer to the door, each word of his children's betrayal cutting deeper than the last. "Mom's new boyfriend is so smart," Emma exclaimed, giggling as she perched on Julian's desk, the very desk where he had taught her to read financial statements when she was 12. "The way you've been transferring those shares right under Dad's nose. It's brilliant." Lucas high-fived Diego, the gesture casual but loaded with meaning. "Can't wait to help run the company the right way. Dad's too conservative, too ethical. There's so much more money to be made. Your father never understood the real potential of this business." Diego's voice dripped false mentorship. All those opportunities he passed up because of his principles, like the Medicare fraud scheme. Emma took another sip of champagne. "When you showed us those profit projections, gosh, Dad would have had a heart attack." "That's just the beginning." Victoria smiled proudly at her children. "Wait until you see what we have planned for the Asian expansion. The regulatory oversight there is flexible." Lucas leaned against the window, the same window where he had stood as a child, promising to make his father proud. "The board meeting next month will be interesting, especially when the FBI findings about our competitor come out and the evidence linking Dad to their scheme," he added. Emma's voice, laced with unsettling excitement, made Julian's stomach churn. "I still can't believe how easy it was to plant those emails using his login." Diego praised, "You both have done wonderfully. Your father taught you well. Perhaps too well. You understood exactly which systems to access, which records to alter." Speaking of records, Lucas suddenly straightened. "We should get back to the party. People will notice if we're all missing at once, especially Dad. He's been weirdly attentive lately, almost as if he suspects something." Emma rolled her eyes. Victoria waved away her daughter's concern. "Your father sees what he wants to see. He's still convinced you both worship him and his precious ethical standards." "Poor Daddy." Emma's voice dripped with mock sympathy. "So busy building his legacy. He never noticed us outgrowing it." To the new Archer Insurance Group, Lucas raised his glass, where profit matters more than principles. Their glasses clinked, the sound echoing in Julian's ears like funeral bells. He watched his children, his legacy, celebrating not just their graduation, but their planned destruction of everything he had built and everything he had taught them to value. Julian's hand tightened around his phone, his thumb hovering over Victor's number. But no, timing was everything. Let them have this moment, this false victory. Let them think their betrayal was complete. He moved silently away from the office, his mind already shifting from shock to strategy. They thought they knew him, the predictable, principled father whose ethics they could weaponize against him. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Back at the party, Julian accepted congratulations and played the proud father with practiced ease. Each smile, each handshake, each proud pronouncement about his children's future roles in the company now carried hidden weight. "Your twins are remarkable. They have such a grasp of modern business practices. They'll do great things with the company." "Oh, I'm counting on it," Julian replied, watching his family work the crowd. "They're about to learn some very important lessons about business and family." The party continued into the night, a glittering celebration of achievement and ambition. But beneath the surface, the real drama was just beginning. Julian had built his empire on careful planning and strategic thinking, and now he would show them exactly what those skills could do when turned to revenge. Let them think they had one perfect betrayal. Soon enough, they would learn that Julian Archer hadn't succeeded in business by being naive. He had succeeded by being several steps ahead of everyone else. The graduation party marked more than just an academic achievement. It marked the moment when masks began to fall and carefully constructed lies began to unravel. And Julian intended to control every moment of that unraveling. Julian's expression remained neutral as he watched his family's betrayal unfold at the graduation party. The evidence of their duplicity was now complete, recorded and documented by the surveillance system Derek had installed. Years of business negotiations had taught him the value of timing. And now that time had come. He slipped away from the main celebration, moving to a quiet corner of the estate's garden, where he could make his calls without being observed. First, he texted Victor. "Execute Plan A. Teams in position." The response came immediately. FBI units standing by. Local police coordinated. All exits covered. His next call was to Agent Allison Ritter, his corporate counsel. She had been working behind the scenes for weeks, preparing for this moment. "Everything's ready," Allison's crisp voice declared with satisfaction. "I've got the injunctions prepared. The moment you give the word, we freeze every account connected to Diego's network. And the trust fund amendments, filed and recorded last month, mean your children's access to company shares and trust funds is now contingent on clean criminal records and 5 years of legitimate work in the company. The ethics clause is ironclad." Julian allowed himself a small smile. What about Victoria's claims to company ownership? The prenuptial agreement's infidelity clause has been activated. Combined with the fraud evidence, she'll lose all claims to company shares. The offshore accounts we trace to her name will be seized. And our competitor? We've already contacted their legal team. They're prepared to file countersuits once we reveal who really attempted to frame them. Their cooperation strengthens our case significantly. Julian checked his watch. Soon, Diego would begin his traditional role as party toastmaster, a position his ego would never let him delegate. "The cameras are in place," Julian confirmed. "Everything will be recorded from multiple angles. All evidence will be undeniable," Allison assured him. "And Julian, the trust fund provisions you added last month. Brilliant. They give the twins a path to redemption, while ensuring they can't profit from their betrayal. Have the entry-level contracts ready. If they want to earn back their place, they'll start from the bottom," Julian instructed. "We can discuss business on Monday, once the press releases are out, explaining the company's commitment to ethical business practices. The market will respond positively to your handling of internal corruption." Julian ended the call as he noticed Molly approaching. Her face showed the perfect mix of concern and determination. "Everything's prepared," she reported. "Security teams are in position, disguised as catering staff. Derek has all the exits monitored." "Good," Julian said firmly. "You understand what happens next." Molly nodded, her loyalty evident in every word. "The company will need steady leadership during the transition. I've already prepared contingency plans for client retention and employee communication. That's why you're being promoted to COO," Julian confirmed. "You've earned it through loyalty and competence, 2 qualities I've learned to value even more highly lately." In the distance, Julian could see Diego gathering people for the toast. The man's tailored suit and practiced charm could no longer hide his predatory nature. "Sir," Derek's voice came through Julian's earpiece. "Victoria just made a call to an offshore number. Should we intervene?" "Let her play her hand," Julian replied coolly. "Everything she does now just adds to the evidence." He watched as Victoria moved through the crowd, her designer dress and perfect smile masking her true nature. For 25 years she had played the role of supportive spouse. But tonight would be her final performance. The twins were holding court near the champagne fountain, their young faces flushed with alcohol and the thrill of anticipated victory. They had no idea that their father had already dismantled their plans, piece by piece. "It's time," Julian murmured more to himself than to Molly. Let's show them what happens when they mistake ethical behavior for weakness. The party reached its peak. In the garden, filled with laughter and music, Diego stood on a temporary stage, tapping his crystal champagne flute for attention. The cameras Julian had arranged were rolling, capturing every moment. Ladies and gentlemen, Diego's voice carried the smooth confidence of a man who thought he'd already won. Please join me in a toast to our graduates. The crowd gathered. Archer Insurance employees mingled with society figures and business associates. Victoria stood near the front, her practiced smile unwavering, while the twins positioned themselves strategically, just as Julian had once taught them, though not for this purpose. To new beginnings. Diego raised his glass, shooting a knowing look at Victoria. And to the future of Archer Insurance Group. Julian stepped forward, his movement deliberate and controlled. Speaking of insurance, his voice cut through the celebratory atmosphere. Let's discuss fraud. At that moment, FBI agents entered silently from multiple directions, their movements coordinated and precise. Victor led them, his badge gleaming in the evening light. Victoria's champagne glass shattered on the marble patio, the sound as sharp as a gunshot. Her perfect composure cracked, revealing the fear beneath. Mom. Emma's voice trembled. What's happening? She repeated. What's happening is justice. Julian's voice rang out with authority and cold anger. Insurance fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy. Shall I continue? Diego's charm vanished, replaced by cold calculation. Julian, my friend, surely we can discuss this privately, like you discussed framing our competitor. Or how about we discuss the offshore accounts, the ghost policies, the manipulated claims data? Julian cut him off. You don't understand. Victoria stepped forward, her voice now soothing as it had been for years. Everything we did was for the company's growth. Save it for your lawyer. Julian's tone could have frozen fire. Though I doubt you'll be interested in how you and your lover plan to destroy everything I built. The twins tried to move toward the house, but found their path blocked by FBI agents. Dad, this is just a misunderstanding. Lucas attempted his boardroom voice, though it shook slightly. Is it? Julian nodded to Derek, who activated the estate's sound system. Suddenly, the twins' own voices filled the air, discussing their roles in accessing systems, planting false evidence, and betraying their father's trust. Emma, your face is white. Were you recording us? She stammered. I was protecting my company, Julian corrected coldly. From all threats, even those from my own blood. Victor stepped forward, raising his badge. Diego Vaughn, Victoria Archer, Lucas and Emma Archer, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, embezzlement, and corporate espionage. You can't do this. Diego shouted, his tone shifting to anger. I made this company what it is. Now you've made yourself a scoundrel. Julian's voice cut like a blade. And now you'll face the consequences. As the FBI agents moved in with handcuffs, the party guests stood frozen, watching the scene unfold. Julian's employees, however, moved with purpose. Security teams emerged from their disguises. Corporate counsel appeared with documents, and Molly began quietly directing the controlled chaos. Mom. Emma tried again, tears streaming down her face. Tell them this isn't true. But Victoria was already being read her rights, her designer dress clashing with the steel handcuffs. Her mask finally cracked to reveal the bitter anger beneath. You self-righteous scoundrel, she spat at Julian. You think your precious ethics build empires. We could have had everything. I already had everything. Julian replied coldly, until greed poisoned it. The cameras continued rolling as the arrests proceeded. Julian had arranged this public takedown deliberately. The company's commitment to ethical behavior would be demonstrated in the most dramatic way possible. Soon, the party guests began to leave, shepherded out by security, while FBI agents secured evidence. Julian's empire would survive this. He had made sure of it. But first, the cancer had to be cut out, completely and publicly. 1 year later, Julian sat in his newly redesigned office, reviewing the quarterly reports. The company hadn't just survived the scandal, it had emerged stronger, its commitment to ethical business practices earning new clients and investor trust. Molly entered, now carrying herself with the confidence of a COO. The board meeting is ready to begin. The new compliance measures are showing excellent results. In our security division, Derek has transformed it completely. His team catches potential fraud before it can take root. The industry is even starting to copy our protocols. Julian nodded, pleased but not surprised. He had chosen his loyal employees well, and their promotions had been earned through both competence and character. A knock at the door revealed Lucas and Emma, dressed in business casual rather than designer suits. Their entry-level positions in different departments had been another calculated decision. Quarterly progress reports, Lucas said as he placed his folder on Julian's desk, his former arrogance replaced by quiet determination. Client satisfaction surveys, Emma added, her documentation in hand as she avoided meeting her father's eyes. Julian reviewed their work carefully. Both showed promise when not corrupted by greed and shortcuts. Your department heads report improvement. Keep it up. They nodded and left, understanding that trust, once broken, took years to rebuild. Their trust funds remained locked behind performance and ethics requirements, a daily reminder of consequences. Later that afternoon, Julian received the final trial updates. Diego and Victoria had fought the charges, their arrogance preventing plea deals, but the evidence had been overwhelming. Their lengthy prison sentences reflected both the financial scale of their crimes and their attempt to frame an innocent competitor. The last appeal was denied, as Agent Allison Ritter reported via conference call. They're facing the full sentences. The asset seizures are complete. Good, Julian said. Transfer everything according to the plan we discussed. He had ensured that recovered funds would be returned to defrauded clients, with the remainder establishing an ethics and business scholarship. Success through integrity wasn't just a slogan. It was a legacy he intended to build. The family photo that once dominated his desk had been moved to a drawer, a reminder of lessons learned. In its place now stood the company's new mission statement, success through integrity, not just words, but a principle proven through fire. His phone buzzed. A message from Dora Marks, the prosecuting attorney whose dedication to justice had matched his own. Their professional collaboration had evolved into something more, proving that life often offered unexpected second chances. Dinner tonight. Julian smiled as he typed his response. He had learned that integrity, while sometimes costly, ultimately protected what mattered most. His company was stronger, led by people proven trustworthy. His children were learning the value of honest work, and he himself had emerged not bitter, but wiser. The graduation party had indeed marked both an end and a beginning. The end of betrayal and the beginning of redemption. Julian had chosen to rebuild rather than simply destroy, creating something stronger from the ashes of betrayal. Looking out over the New York skyline, Julian reflected on the past year's changes. He had been right. Those ethical foundations he built his company upon held firm when the storm came, while those who chose expediency over integrity fell. Success through integrity, he murmured, reading the words that now defined both his company and his life. Some might call it old-fashioned or limiting, but Julian Archer knew better. He had proven that principles backed by strength and strategy could overcome any betrayal, and that perhaps was the most valuable lesson of all. 5 years later, the New York Globe's business section lay open on Julian's desk, the headline bold against crisp paper, "From Scandal to Success. Archer Insurance Group named Most Ethical Corporation for the 5th year running." At 57, Julian had transformed his company's darkest moment into its greatest strength. His new office on the top floor of Archer Tower, a recent acquisition in downtown New York, offered a panoramic view of New York Harbor. The space reflected the company's evolution. Modern, transparent, with glass walls symbolizing the openness that had become their hallmark. "Your 9 o'clock is here," Molly announced through the intercom. 5 years as COO had not changed her efficiency, though her salary and influence had grown considerably. Send them in. The door opened to reveal a very different Victoria Archer. From the polished socialite who had once plotted his downfall to a humbled woman whose prison term had left its mark. Discount clothes replaced her designer outfits. Her once perfect hair now showed significant gray. She had been released last month after serving 4 years of her 6-year sentence, reduced for cooperation. "Hello, Julian." Her voice carried none of its former confidence. "Thank you for seeing me. Sit down." Julian's tone remained professionally neutral. "The meeting is purely business. Your lawyer requested it, citing your right to know about your frozen assets. I assume you've read the final disposition." Julian pushed a document across his desk. "The courts have upheld the seizure of all assets tied to the fraud. Your appeals are exhausted." "I wasn't appealing for money," Victoria whispered, twisting her hands in her lap. I wanted the children to do well." Julian cut her off. "No thanks to your influence. Indeed, Lucas and Emma have surprised everyone with their dedication to redemption. After serving 18 months of house arrest and community service, their sentences reduced due to their age and cooperation. They started at the absolute bottom of the company. No privileges, no special treatment. Lucas now heads our new ethics compliance division, and Emma is running our client protection unit. They earned those positions through honest work and proven character. And they still won't see me." Victoria's voice cracked. Their choice. They recalled how their uncle Diego self-destructed in prison when his schemes fell apart. A cautionary tale now studied in business schools. Unable to accept his downfall, he had tried to run another fraud scheme from prison. His additional 20-year sentence had driven home the consequences of his actions. His recent suicide attempt had made headlines, though Julian suspected it was just another manipulation. "The insurance industry still talks about it," Julian noted clinically. "How Diego tried to blame his cellmate for the new scheme, just as he tried to frame our competitor. Some people never learn." Victoria's eyes dropped to her lap. The affair that had once seemed so exciting and worth the risk had cost her everything. Her lover was now facing decades in prison. Her children refused contact. Her social circle had evaporated, and even her own sister had testified against her to save herself from conspiracy charges. "I have another appointment," Julian announced, signaling the end of the meeting. "The terms are clear in these documents. The trust fund you tried to drain has been converted into the Ethics and Business Scholarship. Last year, it sent 30 students to college." As security escorted Victoria out, Molly entered with the morning reports. Under her leadership, the company had expanded internationally, legitimately this time. Her wedding ring caught the light. Her marriage to Derek Hayes last year had united 2 of Julian's most trusted employees. The Beijing office audit came back clean, she reported. Derek's security protocols are being adopted industry-wide. The FBI is even consulting him now. "Good," Julian said. "And the twins' quarterly reviews are outstanding. Lucas caught 2 potential fraud attempts last month, and Emma's client protection programs have reduced claim disputes by 60%. Molly smiled. They learned their lesson the hard way, but they learned it well. The intercom buzzed. "Dad." Emma's voice carried the professional tone she had earned. "The ethics committee meeting starts in 10 minutes. I'm on my way." Julian gathered his materials, including the proposal for their newest initiative, rehabilitation programs for white-collar offenders. The irony was not lost on anyone. In the elevator, Julian's phone buzzed with a message from Dora, whose years of marriage had only strengthened their bond. Her work as a federal prosecutor and his commitment to corporate ethics made them a formidable team in the fight against financial fraud. Dinner at 7. The kids want to discuss their community service program. Julian smiled as he typed his response. Dora's teenage children had initially been wary of their mother's relationship with a man whose own family had imploded so publicly, but time and consistency had built trust. Now they were active in the company's youth outreach programs, turning past scandals into future prevention. The ethics committee meeting room was full when Julian arrived. Lucas sat to his right and Emma to his left. Positions earned through proven integrity rather than birthright. Their faces bore the maturity that hard lessons had carved into them. Today's agenda, Lucas began, his voice carrying the weight of experience, includes our new partnership with the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. Agent Bird will join us virtually to discuss implementation. As Victor's familiar face appeared on the screen, Julian reflected on the transformation of his family and company. The betrayal that could have destroyed everything had instead forced a radical recommitment to principles. Every employee now knew the story and the consequences of choosing expediency over ethics. After the meeting, Julian had lunch with his children. A weekly tradition started during their house arrest that had evolved into valuable family time. "Mom tried to contact me again, Sarah," Lucas mentioned in a resigned tone. "What did you tell them?" Julian asked, knowing his daughter's strength. "The same thing as always. You need to take responsibility for your choices. No excuses, no justifications." Emma's smile was sad but firm. "You taught us that, Dad." Lucas nodded in agreement. The Ethics Scholarship Program is reviewing applications for next semester. Some of the essays are even using our family story as a case study in business classes now. "Good," Julian replied. "Let them learn from it. Your mother and Diego chose greed over integrity. The consequences were inevitable." Walking back to his office, Julian passed a wall of awards, industry recognition of their ethical transformation. The company's stock had tripled since the scandal, proving that principles and profits weren't mutually exclusive. Allison Ritter, now their general counsel, fell into step beside him. The last appeal was rejected. Diego's assets in Switzerland have been seized. The Victim Compensation Fund is fully funded. Make sure it's publicized. People need to see that justice doesn't expire, Julian instructed. In his office, Julian looked at the new photos on his desk. Real smiles and earned happiness. Dora and her children at last year's company picnic, the twins receiving awards for their ethics programs, and Molly and Derek's wedding, where he had given the bride away. The old family photo now rested in his drawer, a reminder rather than a regret. Its replacement was the company's new motto, expanded from the original. Success through integrity, principles proven through adversity. His phone buzzed again, a message in the family group chat. The twins were planning a surprise for Dora's birthday. Their acceptance of their stepmother had been gradual but genuine, built on shared values rather than shared blood. As evening approached, Julian prepared to leave for dinner. Through his window he could see the lights of New York Harbor. The same view he had when everything fell apart. But now it symbolized not just success, but redemption. The company had survived betrayal by becoming stronger, more ethical, more vigilant. His children had learned the hardest lessons and emerged wiser. Even the victims of the fraud had been made whole, their trust restored along with their money. And Julian himself had discovered an unexpected truth. Sometimes the worst betrayals lead to the best transformations. His new family, built on chosen loyalty rather than assumed trust, proved that second chances came to those strong enough to earn them. The betrayers, Victoria, now living in a modest apartment on her counselor's salary, and Diego, facing decades behind bars, had reaped the consequences of their choices. Their cautionary tale had become the foundation for something better, stronger, and more lasting. Success through integrity wasn't just a motto anymore. It was a legacy, proven in fire and stronger for the testing. As Julian left his office, he passed the security desk where it had all begun. Anthony, still manning his post, nodded respectfully. "Good evening, Mr. Archer. Give my best to the family." "We will, Anthony. Keep watching for the small things. They matter most," Julian replied. The evening air carried a hint of spring as Julian headed home, not to the estate where betrayal had played out, but to the waterfront home he shared with Dora. There, surrounded by chosen family and earned trust, He had rebuilt more than just a company. He had rebuilt a legacy worth inheriting.